Professor George Szamuely, Senior Research Fellow at Global Policy Institute and author of a very fine book, Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia, which was so prescient, joins us now. Dr. George, thanks for joining us again on the show. Early to say yet, we're still dealing with exit polls, but it seems that the curse of Zelensky has struck again, but that the electorate did not have the courage to vote for a change of direction. Is that a fair summary in your view?
I think so. The AFD did pretty well. Obviously, it's a historic breakthrough. They got almost twice as many votes as in the last election, but they didn't do quite as well as they had probably hoped for, particularly after Elon Musk's intervention and all the publicity generated by that interview that he had with Alice Weidel, and then she met Vice President Vance, and all of that was somehow expected to give her party more of a boost. In the end, she kind of ended up with pretty much what she had, a couple of months ago. So I think that's the case. The Christian Democrats have not done particularly well. And, the big surprise so far of this election has been the sudden surge of the Die Linke party, the party of the left, which seemed completely dead and buried after Sarah Wagenknecht had started her own party. But Sarah Wagenknecht had so far doesn't seem to have done as well as it was expected. So you're absolutely right. It does look as if Germany was just going to continue drifting as it has been now, really for 2 decades, ever since the fall of Gerhard Schroeder.
Well, the only two parties that were in the running that offered a different direction were the AFD and the Sarah Wagenknecht group. I'm closer to her, of course. But they have both done less well than they might have expected, and certainly than they might have hoped. So what we have now is a polity in Germany where if you add the Green vote to the so-called left vote of Die Linke, which is not a left vote really because it's pro-war, pro-Israel, pro-censorship, pro-attacks on free speech, pro-Zelensky, and so on. So actually the Greens and them together make about 30% of the vote. So liberalism isn't dead. And of course, if you add Schulz's vote to that, it's about 45%. And the AFD and the Wagenknecht group are coming in at around 35% of the vote. Merz is the new chancellor, will be the new chancellor, but can't govern on his own. What do you think he'll do next?
Well, I think he's going to try to form a coalition government with the Social Democrats. Whether that will be enough, whether there's enough there to command a majority in the Bundestag, that seems dubious, in which case he's probably going to turn to the Greens. And then essentially you're going to have exactly the same situation as you had when the so-called traffic light coalition, namely if you've got these three parties that can't really agree on anything very much, and they would just continue with the same policy on Ukraine, same policy, by the way, also on the Israel's war on Gaza, same policy also on mass migration and their inability to bring that under some kind of control. So given what the Christian Democrats, and this goes all the way back to Angela Merkel's time, that they somehow they want to create this firewall against the AFD, it means that the Christian Democrats are always prisoners of that kind of neoliberal center-left grouping of the Social Democrats and the Greens. They can't do anything else because there's no, once they made a decision that they're not going to have anything to do with the AFD, then they have no other choice but to go to the Social Democrats and the Greens. I mean, the Free Democrats, it doesn't look like they're going to make it into the Bundestag, but you never know. They always somehow manage to creep over that 5% threshold. But essentially, nothing is going to change, which means that at some point, things are going to get really dire in Germany. Germany continues with its economic decline. Germany continues with its social decline. And this will only be a boost for the AFD because essentially the campaign for 2029 begins tonight.
Now, let's take a look at the SPD, formerly the leading socialist party in Europe. This was a party of which Rosa Luxemburg was, for a time at least, a member. This was a giant of politics not so long ago, and Scholz has taken them to their lowest vote ever. He can't stay on as leader, can he?
No, he's done. His political career is over, it's hard to see what happens now. This is 16%. 16%, as you say. This is the party of Karl Marx. This is the party of Karl Kautsky, Edward Bernstein. You go through these names of these giants of the European socialist movement, and it's now, and even in more recent times, Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, Gerhard Schroeder. I mean, it is pathetic to collapse into this state. So yeah, this is a total failure and rejection. And you'd have to believe that this decline will continue. I think it's just going to become, one of these small parties that's sort of 5 or 6%. So I think they're finished. But the unfortunate thing, as far as I can see, the unfortunate thing is that the Greens, despite their failures of their economic policies, despite the absolutely catastrophic foreign policy pursued by Annalena Baerbock of antagonizing the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese all at one and the same time. I mean, the idea you're the foreign minister and you're antagonizing, 3 major powers. I mean, that's your diplomacy. And they're going to, if they are going to join the coalition, they're going to absolutely angle to continue on that job, that foreign ministry. That's the one that the Greens always want to control.
And Merz himself is a former BlackRock executive.
Yep.
Does that tell us everything we need to know about him?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he is, he has the classic profile of a Christian Democrat. He was born in North Rhine-Westphalia, comes from a very prosperous family. He's a Catholic. He has tried, I mean, this is, I think, he was his third attempt at trying to get to be the leader of the party. He was outmaneuvered by Angela Merkel. And then after he failed with Merkel, he went and made an awful lot of money. He worked as a corporate lawyer, and then he was on the board of innumerable corporations. I mean, just go through the list of all the major corporations that he served on the board of. Very, very wealthy man, absolutely extremely wealthy. And that's who he is. He's a neoliberal. He wrote a book in favor of venture capitalism. I mean, his model of capitalism is vulture capitalism. Essentially the BlackRock model. You buy up companies, you shed your workforce, and then you sell them off. I mean, that's his model of capitalism.
Well,
it's not the Germans, that's the market economy. I mean, it's definitely the opposed to what Germany used to stand for.
Well, exactly. It was once a model of kind of hybrid capitalism, and will now be a Germany where the vultures are circling. Let's take a look at the European scene as a whole, George. I'd love your take on this. I mean, Trump and Vance and Musk are going through the Europeans like a dose of salts, aren't they?
Right. They really are. Because this grouping has absolutely driven Europe into the most abject, humiliating role that it's ever had. Totally lacking any independent agency, totally lacking any kind of a distinctive foreign policy, a kind of a particularly European view of the world. They've completely, rented out their foreign policy to the United States. I mean, when they destroyed the Americans openly boasted that they destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, and then Sergeant Schultz, I call him Sergeant Schultz, was stood there next to Biden, and he had nothing to say. Your great ally, your great liberator, and was boasting that he was basically driving your economy into the toilet. Well, if you allow yourself to be treated like a doormat, then people will take you to be a doormat. So, of course, Trump and Vance have no respect at all for Europe. And they expect the Europeans to fall into line, just do as we say, and don't start coming here with all kinds of programs of your own. No, you do as we say. And the Europeans have brought this on themselves. And the more that they complain about Trump, and Trump also remembers that many of these same leaders openly rejoiced after 2020, and some of them actually plotted against him. Like Keir Starmer sent his flunkies to campaign on behalf of Kamala Harris. Trump hasn't forgotten that, so there's absolutely going to be payback now.
But to what extent can they throw a spanner in the works? I mean, they're talking big, some bigger than others, Starmer biggest of all. But if Trump is really bent on a negotiation with Putin and an agreement with Putin over the fate of the war, to what extent can these Europeans hold an independent position and make it count?
It's very hard to see. They could, in theory, send in their own so-called peacekeepers or some, whatever forces to help out Kiev. But there's a problem there, because the Russians have said we won't accept any British, French, or NATO member states' forces, whether they come under a NATO flag or not under a NATO flag. So the Russians have said no, and the Americans have said we're not going to provide you with any support. So even if there's a lot of big talk from Keir Starmer and Macron that we're going to put in our forces, ultimately there's no one who's going to protect them. So it's hard to see what really that they can do. I mean, and they also have very limited persuasive powers with Trump. I mean, I think they think that maybe they can fly into Washington and try to worm their way in, flatter him. That's what they think. That's how you deal with Trump. Flatter him, be sycophantic, and maybe Trump will come around and start sounding a lot more like Biden than now. But I don't think that's going to work. So the only thing they can do is ultimately, if they go absolutely crazy and do something really stupid, it's not impossible. And the British and French, send in their own forces, or maybe the Canadians send in some forces. But that just seems like a completely ridiculous and doomed enterprise.
It would be war, wouldn't it, George? It would be the Russians would treat it as an act of war.
I would think that they will treat it as an act of war, and they won't be able to do much about it, because they won't be able to invoke Article 5, and they won't be able to ask America for any kind of assistance, because the Americans have already said, we're not going to do anything to assist you if you send in your forces. So, it's an enterprise doomed to fail. But I mean, as you were saying about Keir Starmer, I don't know what he's thinking. I really, it doesn't seem to make any kind of sense at all, any more than the things Macron has said about sending in forces into Ukraine. And he started talking about this a year ago. It never really made any sense then, but they're just wedded to this idea that somehow Ukraine is some vital national interest of theirs, even though they've never been able to explain in what way anything in Ukraine is a vital interest to either Britain or to France.
So what does it all mean for the end of the war? If you were a betting man, George, can Trump and Putin, as it were, bilaterally bring this war to an end, in your view?
I think that they can bring it to some kind of a conclusion. Basically, I think it would have to be a ceasefire along the current lines of contact, combined with some sanctions relief for Russia, combined with maybe some European security conference along the lines of Helsinki. I think that's more doubtful, but combined maybe with some economic partnerships agreements with the United States. The problem for Russia is they've had bad experiences with coming to agreements with the West. Trump isn't going to be there forever. You know, who knows who comes after him? If it's J.D. Vance, then that's fine. Then I think the agreement would hold. If it's somebody else, then, you know, we're going to be along the same cycle that the West turns around and just reneges on all the commitments it's made. If I were a betting man, I think it is going to come to an end reasonably soon.